welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I'm really grateful to see so many people in the audience, and I know that you're all here because you're, like I am, an enormous fan of Gay Odmark, who is somebody I feel really privileged to have known for basically, I think, the entire time I've lived here. Almost 13 years now I've known you. And I learned something new from Gay all the time. I'll give you a little bit of background about why we're doing this together. And so right now, as Jenny said, at the Sun Valley Center for the Arts, this spring we're pursuing a big idea project called Unraveling, which is a reconsideration of the history of colonization in the Americas. And India, obviously, is not part of the Americas, but because Gay lived through one of the most important colonial events in recent history, we thought it would be a perfect opportunity to have her share her story. So there's an exhibition at the center. We have a lot of different related events. I hope that you'll pick up, I left brochures on the tables at the back. So we have a full calendar of related events, so please join us for that. And in addition to thanking Gay for joining us, I want to thank the library for allowing us to use this space. We're really grateful to them and so lucky to be in this beautiful new space. So congratulations on this. Thank you for sharing it. I would also, as part of this big idea project, we at the Sun Valley Center for the Arts would like to acknowledge the Shoshone and Bannock people and their homelands here in the Wood River Valley and their use of these lands past, present, and future. And as part of this big idea project, the community library has also curated, they're collaborating with us through an exhibition that they curated at the Regional History Museum that is titled Who Writes History? Frontier Voices, Native Realities. And it's a look at the collision between European settler culture and Native American culture here in the Wood River Valley at the turn of the century. So please go over to the Regional History Museum and check that out. And then, do we think Gay's microphone is working?
Is it working?
Oh yeah. Okay. Okay. So Gay, please share your book. Your book recommendations.
The two books I feel are really significant. At least for me, I felt lately this was very important. One's called Midnight's Furies by Naseed Hajari, and the other one is called Indian Summer by Alexa von Tunzelmann. And there's so much more. When everybody writes history, they always write. And you think you've read the most recent, but of course there's always another book, and that's a good thing. And so here, these two I really feel are worth looking at if you're looking at the context of not only, it's not about just England and India, but it's the context of the war, World War II, and who was in and who was out, and who was dealing with who. So I think it's an important, those two are important books.
Yeah, thank you. One is Midnight's Furies.
Yes, and the other one by Hajari. It's I believe he writes for the Washington Post and a few other,
right.
He's a journalist. Midnight's Fury by Naseed, N-I-S-I-D, H-A-J-A-R-I, Hajari. And the other one is Alex von Tunzelmann, and it's Indian Summer. So these are really...
Yeah. And actually, there's a beautiful interview with Naseed Hajari on Fresh Air on NPR. So you can look that up, and it gives...
By Terry Gross,
a nice synopsis of the book. Okay. So as we start tonight, and I'll tell you that Gay and I spent, we figured about 8.5 hours together recording her oral history for an online archive called 1947 Partition Stories. And so tonight you'll get a small, you'll be grateful to know we're not going to be here for 8 hours. We'll be here for about an hour. But if you are ever curious about even more about Gay's history, you'll be able to access that on this archive, which is
Berkeley and Stanford, I think.
Berkeley and Stanford are collaborating.
Millions of people.
They're collecting. They want to collect 10,000 oral histories. So as we start tonight, we thought it would be helpful to give everybody just a 5-minute history lesson in partition. So we have some slides. So this map, can you all see the map, more or less? Okay, so this map that we're looking at is a map of the Indian subcontinent that shows kind of the mass migration that occurred in 1947 when the British pulled out of India after nearly 200 years of colonial rule, first by the East India Company and then by the British Crown. They come out of World War II. They are, financially victorious in World War II, but financially strapped. Indian independence movements have been asking, I'll show you a slide in a minute, actually, of Gandhi. Well, we'll come back to this, but people like Mohandas Gandhi have been fighting for independence for decades, and so in 1947, finally the British pull out. And what that leads to is mass migration of people, largely along religious lines, into the newly formed Pakistan, which consists of both West Pakistan and East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, and into India, back and forth. 15 million people move along. But of course, this move for independence had been and really pushed for decades by Gandhi. And then, so as Gay and I were going through photos, this is a photo by Margaret Burke White, the famous photographer who covered Partition for Life magazine. And Gay pointed out to me, who's in the far left?
That's my aunt, actually, on this side, and my
Yeah.
uncle. And they wrote 12 books on Gandhi during their lifetime. And I have a copy of one of the books, which was given to me by chance. And she wanted me to help her when I went there a few years ago to help her. She died actually in 2000. So she said, come and help me. And I said, I can't. I live in America. I'm an artist, and my mother's living with me, so I can't come out for 6 years and do this book with you.
Yeah.
But I was very grateful because I realized she was such an influence for all of us.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about her as we look through some of Gay's family history
She
together.
was his physician, actually. She was his doctor in the end.
Yeah.
So she went with him the whole way.
Remarkable
Yeah,
woman.
really amazing.
Yeah. So the British began making plans to pull out of India in 1946. But there's no clear strategy for what their withdrawal plan will be. And two leaders sort of emerge alongside Lord Mountbatten, Dickey Mountbatten, who became viceroy. He only became viceroy, and I didn't realize this.
After independence.
Right before
Right
independence.
before,
in February of 1947. So literally 6 months before the British pull out, Mountbatten arrives in India and is given the task of figuring out how to do this. And he works with Jinnah, who is on the right, the leader of the Muslim League, and Nehru, first Prime Minister of independent India, on the left. Nehru comes from a Hindu family. Both of them, and I learned a lot of this from Gay, both of them were Anglophiles, educated in England. Neither of them was religious. But Jinnah really feared that if the British pulled out, the Muslim population of India would be treated as second-class citizens unless they were given their own country. And so he really fought for partition. Nehru was against partition, Gandhi was against partition, but in the end, the British caved to this demand, and the result is that Pakistan is formed by withdrawal from British withdrawal.
And the map maker.
Yeah. So this is a map of India from 1909 that shows religious majorities with, with the Muslim majority in what's now Pakistan and now Bangladesh, Hindu majority in most of the rest of the subcontinent, and then the Sikh population was largely concentrated, something like 5 out of 6 million of the Sikh population were concentrated in the Punjab. And sorry this is blurry, but it gives you a sense. It's the same map, with a portrait of Sir Cyril Radcliffe, who was a map maker who had never visited India, but was brought to draw the boundaries of these new countries. So he arrives, he worked with a team that included a number of Indian map makers, and in the course of just a few months, he divides the continent up, the subcontinent up, creating Pakistan, India, and then East Pakistan, largely along religious lines. But what happens is, in the Punjab in particular, the Sikh population is split in half, literally, by this boundary. Lahore, where Gay was born, and we'll talk more about Lahore, is a majority Hindu and Sikh city, but because Radcliffe was giving Calcutta to India, he felt he had to give a major city to Pakistan. So he drew Lahore into Pakistan in the end. And I mean, what happens up here in Kashmir, the line trails off. And Kashmir was majority Muslim in population, ruled by a Hindu ruling family. The idea was that there would be a referendum, and if you have read the news in the last month, that not only never occurred, but continues to be a fraught part of the globe.
And just to put that into perspective, all the Sikhs, all their forefathers and their gurus, their own, like the Muslims have, Muhammad, all their leaders basically were persecuted during the Mughals.
Right.
But what happened is, in this case, they lost all their shrines. So the killings became very drastic, and they were the biggest. I would say they killed probably more, and I would say equally the hate was huge, because they lost everything. They were promised their own area, their own dominion, and they never got it. So that was sad.
Yeah.
That was our family.
Oh. Okay, so even before partition, there is a lot of violence and rioting. This is a photo of the city of Amritsar in 1947, April 1947. Huge, again, 15 million people are displaced. Huge migrations going both directions. Loaded trains, and do you want to talk about ghost trains?
Yes. Yeah. So what happened is, you're raised by your parents, and you're also raised by the servants. So my parents wouldn't tell me really what was happening, because why would they? I was 6.5 years old. But the servants would be talking, and they'd say terrible things have happened today, and then they'd go into this tremendous, hate that was going on, and the trains were coming in to Lahore, the mail train particularly. At a certain time, you had to get your mail. Well, in those trains, there were only dead and slaughtered bodies, one after the other. And so they would stop at a village, it would be a Hindu village, and then the Muslims would run from the trains and kill the people in that village. And it went on and on. One after the other village was ransacked, killed, destroyed, raped. It just never ended. And I remember them saying, it's not going to get any better. And that's about the time, my parents said, I think we'll be leaving quite soon. And then other things happened with that. Yeah, it's terrifying.
Refugee camps sprang up in both countries. Again, up to 2 million people, they estimate, were killed during this period, between 1 and 2 million.
Period.
Just a period of months, really.
That's it, the vultures.
These are all Margaret Burke-White photographs of vultures. And this is Lahore in August 1947, the city Gay was born in, the shopping district having been
destroyed. And we just left prior to this, I think.
Yeah. So now,
Daddy and Mummy. You remember Mummy.
Pardon me?
Give us a perspective of the relative population of the Hindus versus the Muslim and the Sikhs. I have no perspective of this.
I think there were 390 million people in India, as is at that time. And then I think there was probably 60 million, they mentioned in one of these books, of which you divide, fourth. And then when you think of who crossed over and where they crossed one country to the other, because the Indians would run from India and then go, obviously to that point, run from Pakistan, rather go to India, and vice versa. Something like 15 million people were displaced in a very short time, because and they were just killing as they ran from one side. They said, "We're going home," and the other would say, "We're going home." But then Ratcliffe had cut everything up to such a degree there was no home for them. They neither could go back, nor was there anything waiting for them. So then the murder, you can see the lack of economy, and the terrifying thing is it just didn't end. There was no solution. They just didn't know what they were going to do. So it was like, you think of Syria and all these people running over and over again. We had millions of people like this. 17 million people were displaced. They said 14 at one point. Then they said 200,000 killed. There were 2 million people killed. That's just today, up to this. But now there'll be more stories maybe after that. So very sad.
The Sikh population was how big?
About Sikh population, I think, was
million.
About 6 million. But they were all a lot concentrated in, obviously, the India and this Punjab area, because their shrines were there of their gurus. They have 10 gurus, so their religious leaders were all in that area, but they didn't get it.
So as we went through Gay's history, we put together some images from her family archives, which are really wonderful, giving sort of a picture of her life in India. This is her father and her mother. Here's Gay and her mother and father at the Taj Mahal.
We always love going there.
Your aunt and uncle.
My dad's eldest sister.
Oh yeah, your father's elder.
Grandma,
Yeah.
that was Dad's, yeah.
And where did she live?
maternal. She lived in Kapurthala, which is
Right.
very close to Amritsar and Jalandhar in the north, in the Punjab. So that area did not, it certainly had, riots and things going on because people were in a state no matter where they were, but less so. We had a house there, or two houses, my grandma's family, and that remained. I haven't gone back to see it, but apparently it still exists, and I'd love to do that. I'd like to take my camera and take some pictures, But the other families are living in there now.
Yeah, that'll be part 2 of our series.
Yeah. Next week,
Yeah.
same time.
And here, this is a photograph of Gay's father with his mother as a young
I just love
man.
the backdrop and Daddy's tight little jacket, which is so British. He was so proper, really more British than my mother. Yeah.
So what was your father's name?
His name was Balbir, Bawa Singh Balbir. So Singh is the Sikh part, and we're half Hindu and we're half Sikh, where we were. And people would intermarry. It didn't matter because it's a matter of caste, and so you're marrying into the caste. So Dad was Hindu and Sikh. His grandmother was Hindu. Father was Sikh. There's no picture of my grandfather that I found, but he had a turban. Of course, he was Sikh, and my grandmother apparently approached him. She was 15 when she married him. He was 40, because his previous wife couldn't have a child. So he married to have children, and so she said something about, I don't care what you do with your books and your Granth Sahib, which is the tome, for the Sikhs, but get that hair cut off. So we always remember the grandfather, was a little bit cowed by grandma. And that was
Strong
the end.
women.
Yeah.
Yeah. You come from a line of strong women, I
Very
think.
strong
Yeah.
women.
And where did he grow up?
So he grew up actually in Kapurthala. He was in that area, and I think he went to a school in that region, high school, and then of course he had to go and be educated in England, because that was the thing to do if you could afford it. So he went to Manchester University and did 2 degrees there, I think in engineering, his master's, and then of course he was arranged for in marriage, and he didn't want to come back, that's for sure. But my grandmother and grandfather had lost 2 other boys, and they had 3 girls, and they had Dad. So he was the one that they, was the promised son, and they didn't like the fact that he just didn't want to come back and do the right thing, which is an arranged marriage. And at that point, of course, I don't know if you want to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he met Mummy. Oh no.
And,
so this
sorry,
is
we
the-
had this is.
Yeah, this is actually where Dad worked. And then when the British left in '46, there were agencies. The British agencies had everything from factories to, any commerce you could imagine, iron or things for the railway, whatever you had to do. They had the agency, so everybody had to buy from them. It wasn't like they were buying Indian; they were buying from the agency. It was British. And my dad actually worked for a British company when he came back, and that is our Muslim driver. And so that was his car, a Ford. He loved cars, and he did like American cars. So that was a Ford, and that's just one of our drivers. He's wonderful, just waiting there. But he was the man actually in the end that took all our clothes, and whatever he could run out, he put in that car and took to my grandmother in Kapurthala, because we had to run by then. We were gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was a very important man in our life. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is Gay's mother. And what was her name?
Her name was Maud Elsby Rudkin, and she didn't like that at all, ever. But she'd seen a movie with Joan Crawford, so she said, "Call me Joan." So, she'd go tone deaf. If anybody said Maud, she said, "It's out, I'm not taking that name." And the reason was because Maud was like, "Come down to the garden, Maud," when she was a kid. And she was the ugliest thing. She didn't want to belong to that group. So she was Joan Crawford, and that was it. So she wouldn't.
Yeah. And where
Very
did she grow
glamorous.
up?
Yeah. And she grew up in Stockport, Cheshire, and I was raised there. She was 7 years older than my father when he met her. That was amazing, really, at that time. As a young student, and I think I have to believe is slightly naive.
Yeah.
And Mummy's rather sophisticated with her French outfits, and and I think she was working for a jeweler. She said at the time it was an uncle. She called him an uncle. So I did meet Uncle later, and I guess he was somebody very fond of her. And I realized that she was a very close relationship with this man. And of course, my dad met him and everything. So I think there was some caring there. Anyway, when she met Dad, she said, "No, I think I can't trust you because you play Bing Crosby music, you make curries, and I think you've already got a wife in India." And he said, "But in spite of all that, would you marry me?" And that was 3 weeks after he met her. He was in love with her. He said he was in love with her.
Yeah.
He said, "I never had a thought." Of course, that was not the case when he got to India.
Yeah.
He had a lady waiting, and that wasn't a good story. Not for my grandparents, for sure.
Right. Right, yeah, they weren't so happy.
Yeah, they weren't happy
Yeah.
about that.
So they met, your parents met
in
when your
Manchester.
father was at
Yeah,
university?
studying, he
Okay.
was studying in University
Yeah.
of Manchester.
And how did your mother feel about moving from England to India?
I think it was exotic to her, because all the stories were, oh, you've got to go there, it's wonderful, and she loved curry and the spices. Later she couldn't eat that food at all, but in the beginning it was all very romantic.
Yeah.
And he was very romantic, he was very sweet, and I think she was a little scared because a lot of the Indian men at that time knew they were going to get married in India, but they had affairs in England. And so the understanding was if you had an Indian boyfriend, for sure you'll never hear about him again because he'll go back to India, get married, he'll be forced to marry, and which most of them were, and then they'd sort of lose the sense of, the so-called romance that they were in. And she was worried about that. And I think they wrote to each other. He had to leave and get a job in India. He said, I can't bring you unless I'm working. So I'm going to go ahead and just, get a job in an English company, and I'm going to start, thinking about when you can come out. But of course he had to approach his parents. And apparently my grandmother had a heart attack. And my grandfather said, you better get her now because the war is coming. There'll never be a ship. And you've got to get the ticket now or you will never get her out here. And it was true, 1939.
Yeah.
And I was born in 14 November, so I always counted a little bit. I said, okay, when did you get married, Mummy? Oh, we were married already. I said, I don't know, I didn't see any certificate on that. So I had to have a little bit of a battle with her. She said, you were married twice. I said, okay, well, I thought it was 3 times. So she, no. So she was ashamed in a way because, being 29 and left, in England, in your own city, in your own town, small town, it's pretty much everybody can talk about you all day long. And that was going to happen if he didn't come back. But he sent her a ticket, and she came back. And the best story, I have to say very quickly, is that she was on the ship, and they expected this woman to marry an Englishman, because that's what they did. She never told them she was coming to marry an Indian.
All
so
the other passengers on the ship.
The passengers are all British, and they were like, all over her and relaxed and whatever. But they didn't realize that this was going to be a woman marrying a native. I mean, that's what they call them, they're native. Because he's all dressed, he's educated probably more than they are. And the boat comes in, and she said everybody saw her looking at this man, and then they all withdrew. They all suddenly went back behind her, and she never saw them again. And all she saw, this blue-eyed, gorgeous man waiting for her. And he was there, and that's all that mattered, From then on, they had a great time, apparently. Yeah. The Gay Bawa, as they were called. So that's why my name is Gay.
Oh.
If I was a boy, it wouldn't have been that. It would have been Rajiv or something like that. Some traditional name.
So anyway, speaking of when you were born, here's baby Gay.
Baby Gay.
In her playpen, in the garden. Yeah. And what was your full name when you were born?
My full name is actually Jacqueline Gay Roma Bawa Bhala Singh, Odmark. So my dad was very contemporary. He said, get rid of all of them. Just keep the Bawa and the Gay and don't do anything else.
And here's another photo of Gay with one of her father's cars.
I have to tell Peter Madsen, my lovely fellow friend here, I have a brush in my hair. See, my hair really matters. And today I went to him, and they all said, what are you doing today? You're really worried. I went, no, I've got to get my hair done. So I didn't realize that. I always had that feeling about my hair and a hairbrush in there. I just recognized that. It was funny.
And you were born in Lahore.
Lahore.
Yeah.
1940. Yeah.
And so here's another, I love this photo of Gay in the garden, a little bit older. This is probably shortly before you left.
5 and a half in there, I love pants, because my dad always wore pants, obviously, as a man. Yeah. And I always said I will only wear pants. So apparently for the first 4 or 5 years I only wear pants. I wanted to be a boy, and I wanted to wear pants, and I didn't understand why everybody had skirts on, So it was a very funny thing, actually, when I think about it. But Indian clothes have pants, too, so maybe it was all part of, later wearing an Indian outfit or something, I don't know.
Yeah. And what was your house like in Lahore?
It was a bungalow style with lots of flowers and plants. I remember a lot of greenery, and I think we had gardens everywhere. We went to families and they had gardens. It was when we went to the public places, there'd be gardens everywhere. They had nannies that would take children. And part of the thing with my nanny was she was a bit of a snob. I didn't realize, but later I thought, why was she mixing me up with the British? I'm Indian. See, I never felt British, I felt Indian. So I thought, I want to play over there with those Indian kids. She said, no, baby, you're English. And she was worried about her status with the other nannies. Like, there's a caste system, we come from. So if you're not quite in the right area, everybody's worried. And they're worried about themselves. They're not worried about you, but they're saying, this does not look good for me. So then I realized I wasn't going to meet any Indian kids except my cousins at the house,
And in addition to your nanny, you had other servants who lived
We
in
did.
the
We had
house.
2 or 3 Muslim servants. They were wonderful. They saved our lives, actually. And they were the cook, which is another story. And Christian nanny, the cook and the bearer. There's always a guy who does everything around the house. And kind of like the maid, but he sets the table, arranges things if people are coming in. And you have an open life. People are coming in out of your doors all the time. It's a bungalow. There's no alarm systems. You have a garden and somebody just says, oh, who's there now? And so very open. Doors are open. And then we had, the driver was Muslim, and then we had one other Christian, and then the gardener. And you end up, you're middle class or whatever, but you have like 10 servants. At that time, that was normal, 8 or 10. And Dad, of course, working for the British, had fairly good income compared to, Some of his family had even more, but that was another thing,
Yeah.
We had a lot.
And what kinds of languages did?
So I was raised, at any time, I was speaking Urdu, Sikh, which is Punjabi, my dad's language, and Urdu also was his language, because the Muslims and Hindu actually learned Urdu. That way they can communicate. And the other way they communicate is through cricket. Everybody has the same words. In cricket, that's why I've never understood why they fight each other, because when they get down to cricket, it's all the same for everybody, The same languages interchange. So we had English, obviously, which I did not speak till I was 6 or 7. I hated the whole thing. And I hated the British, actually. I just did. I didn't like the color. I didn't like anybody, really, other than my mother. She was acceptable, but the rest must have been due with nanny. That's all I can say. And then obviously we were talking in the dialect, which is Punjabi. And then Mummy had to speak French. So she and I had a dialogue in French going on. Yeah,
Nice.
in some way.
All those sounds.
It was great,
And as Gay and I talked about her childhood, she talked a lot about visiting gardens in Lahore. This is a photo of Shalimar Gardens.
I love that. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, and when we look at her artwork in a little bit, you'll see a lot of these motifs showing up again. I mean, I think that the architecture and the
It really influenced me.
Yeah,
That
the flora.
Mughal architecture is what influenced me, not the Indian. It seemed boring, but the architecture of the Mughals, all the way to Rajasthan. When people go to India, they love northern India because the architecture is so beautiful. It's all to do with the Muslim rulers in the 1500s.
Okay, and do you want to talk about? So you had Muslim servants. Your father was Hindu and
Mommy is
Sikh.
Protestant.
Yeah.
Dad was an atheist. He didn't really practice. He didn't like to. But Mom was definitely a Protestant, and Nanny, of course, was Christian. Maybe that's why they, hit it off.
Right.
And then I think then we had servants. Actually, the Hindu servants would pray in the house. The Muslims would go to the mosque. So if we had servants, they were gone 5 times a day. That was it.
Yeah.
And then, I know. It's like, oh, hello, how convenient, huh? I love that idea. It's like the Italians. Yes, I'm going to go and get my cappuccino now, and I'm going. And the rest of everybody was, we were playing harmonica, we're singing, dressed up in Indian clothes. It was like really jolly, but we were looking at all the gods and going, wow, he was really naughty. This is a good one. It was like a smorgasbord of gods, when it comes to Hindu. So you can't go wrong, because the bad guy is going to make something good with you, and the good guy is going to do something bad to you.
Yeah.
So we were like all over the map with the Indian gods.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah. And what holidays did you celebrate? Everything.
Yeah, Christmas and, Christmas for sure. And it was hard to enjoy Christmas when you're sweating cobs and changing, 3 times a day and having a shower, and the curry is like, this going on. It's very hard, but we always had a Christmas tree. Mommy made sure that we had all the decorations. Oh no, Christmas was serious. We had the turkey, which was unfortunate at one point because we had Siamese cats, and they ran around the turkey, and so George became our friend, and then finally arrived on the table. It wasn't very nice.
Oh.
I mean, it was like really rude, and I think I turned vegan, vegetarian at that time. I said, forget it, I'm not eating my George.
Let's go back to this photograph. This is a photograph that the French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson took of Gay's aunt with Gandhi.
It's that same aunt that and my uncle is behind with the suit on, I guess the blazer.
Yeah, this extraordinary, it's this, I was thinking today about this extraordinary moment where people in your family are colliding with Cartier-Bresson,
walking around with her dresses.
Gandhi.
Her frocks, They loved my mother, but she was British, but they never did anything other than totally respect her. But they were fighting against the British the whole time and dying, some of them too.
Yeah.
And in this case, she is taking care of Gandhi because every time the British said something or did something he didn't like, and it went against his people and his ideology, he would say, I'm now going for a fast. Well, he looked ancient. By the time he was 50-something, he had got so many fasts. And my aunt was brought in because the doctor that actually treated Gandhi, she had become his apprentice. She'd already gone into medical school in the north of India. She came back, and my uncle said, what are you doing with your life? And she said, I've got my degree, and I can do anything I want now. She said, will you go and work for this doctor? And she did. And it happened to be Gandhi's doctor because, of course, that's where they were. Wardha is an area. And I think she was sent to eradicate cholera somewhere, and then they called her back and they said, we heard that you eradicated cholera in this small town. And she said, well, I did what I had to do. I'm a doctor, So Gandhi had heard about it, and he said, I like her fortitude and her dedication. I want her to be with me. When I go through this fasting, I want this woman at my side. And then Cartier-Bresson walked in, and there's the picture.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
So yeah, she kept him alive, he's hydrated.
Yeah.
And he liked pretty women around him too. So
Yeah.
he said, I'm just testing my, my
resolve. And here again that's case Anne with Gandhi.
That's that picture.
So I thought now we'd talk a little bit about partition and how. So you were maybe 6 years old,
I
and
was around 6 years, 6 and a
what
half
were
when it
I
started
know
to
you
happen,
had sort of 4 key moments
Yeah.
that made you aware of what was happening before you were really able to understand the politics.
Right, so back to the servants, because again, Dad and Mom would not be saying very much, and it was getting really bad. And one of the incidents I remember, actually my mother was incredible. She saw people coming through the garden with kerosene, and they were lit. And Dad was having to hide occasionally. He had to sort of leave, and when he left, he was in the house, or he was at work or whatever. And I thought to myself, we could have been dead. I mean, these people came towards the house, we have open doors, they came to the window side of our bedroom, and my mother stood there, and I'm blonde, blue-eyed, thank God. And she said, what do you want from me? She said, I'm English, go away. I mean, like that, I'll never forget that. I mean, she just stood there, and we could have been massacred, raped for sure. And I don't know where Dad was, he must have been hiding or something. And we still had the Muslim servants in the house. And they were doing jihad at night because they had to join or they were considered traitors. So our servants would work with the jihad at night, come back, and at 7 o'clock in the morning we'd have breakfast, and they would give us our food, they would take care of us. But I kept hearing from the servants, So this was one incident, and they went away. She said, go away, and they did. The other incident I thought was terrifying, and I couldn't get anything out of my parents, but this one naturally was my friends next door in the family were raped by the Muslims. And here we have Muslim servants again, and Dad is not being killed, but 2 of his best friends were killed at the same time. I remember hearing that. So the rape and the sound, people say sound is something, and I think sound is more intense. You never forget the sound. You never forget the sound. And in all these incidents, the sound kept coming back to me. All the things I remembered were the bad things, but there were only a few of them, but they were very intense, and I don't know why I don't remember anything else, because the rest of us seemed like it was a beautiful life, gardens, good food, everybody seemed happy. These moments would come, and I think I was about 6 then. Another moment came when I was standing at the bottom of the garden, and usually a nanny or a servant is with a child, and I don't know what happened, but I looked this way and that, and then I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was seeing truckloads of bodies falling off, but dismembered bodies. They were all cut to pieces. I never registered it because I think I just went out. I think my whole system just said, this can't be right, and it wasn't right, and so I think that moment is one I call the moment that you just are so shocked that you just can't believe that you're standing looking at dismembered bodies, and then you daren't think about anything else. And that was another big thing. So that was visual. And these 3 or 4 incidents, I think, just really literally informed me much more than I could imagine. And I think it came through my work.
Yeah.
I think I had to reclaim them in some way for myself without having the pain of that. Because, a child can't do anything.
And that moment when your mother was in the garden.
And then what happened finally, it really broke the whole thing, was my mother and Dad, after dinner, because it's always warm, they always say, oh, it's very hot now. Well, it's hot 3/4 of the time, but, and there's 9-10 months of heat, in northern India, but at night it's cooler. So we always say people and snakes come out. And the snakes have very soft bellies, so they like the cool. And so my parents would walk around the garden after dinner, and then this horrendous screaming, my father comes in. and the servants start running, and it's all chaos. And I'm inside, and of course I'm in bed. And I hear him say, "Mother is shot at. Get out of here. Get here. Come right now." Well, luckily she didn't get killed, and she didn't even get a bullet or anywhere. But she did basically run in, and they then ran to find out who this guy was. And it was like a sniper. People were starting to shoot people. They was coming closer to us. You know, we were in this lovely area, but it was coming closer. And of course, with the hospital right there, who knows what is going on.
Right.
But we had a lot of really tragedy around. We just as children, we're protected, but you still hear everything. In the night, they're talking, and so you hear a lot.
So do you think that incident is the one that made your
I think
family
that made my
decide?
father say, "This is it. This is coming so close." The rape next door. This was very short time between these incidents.
And what? So when you left,
so we actually, and that's the hardest thing. I was saying, Courtney, I can't remember the one night, and Betsy and I, thank God, here have been writing, and Betsy's been such a support system as you are. And I think the whole valley is a support system, actually. It's amazing. But I think we all have stories, and I think in my case what really helped is writing and painting. All these years I've painted and drawn, and I didn't know why, but I realized it was a necessity. And if somebody said, I don't know if Gail Severn is here, but God help her, she's been brilliant. She was so nice. She took me on, literally as a naive artist in '89. So I was, I think, 49 when I started really thinking I should do something with this. And she said, "I think you can." And the trouble is I could never do two things the same. So she'd say, "Your birds are really selling. I think you should just make more birds." That did it. I was never going to make another bird again. I mean, I am not commercially viable. I mean, that's all there is to it. I know it now. It's taken me, how many years? 79, 78 years, whatever. So anyway, but thank you, Gail. I'm so glad you're here.
So you think you left
so I think I left. We left.
In
It seemed to me we left in the middle of the night. And I remember, and this is a strange thing because I don't remember what we left in. Couldn't have been on a train because they were massacred. But it's possible we went in a car, and I actually have been connected with my ex-husband, and I've been asking him, "What did I say to you? 40, 50 years ago." He said, "Well, you told me this horrendous story." I said, "Well, what did I tell you?" So I'm trying to find out my own way of what happened that night, because it's kind of challenging. You have this gap, and everybody has it. I don't care who it is. We all have some moment where we can't define ourselves, and yet we need to define ourselves. And that moment hangs us up, It's like a hook in you. You try and take the hook out all the time, and you can't take it out. Because that one thing is still in your body, So no matter what you do, you think, "Am I right? Did I say something? Did I really say? Am I authentic?" It questions your identity and your all of that, I think. So for me, I think when Ted said to me, my ex-husband, "You told me you were in a car, and your parents wanted to protect you and get you out of there, and the dad and mother and myself and the driver would have gone. And now we're trying to get to Bombay." And I'm looking at the map going, "God, that's a long way in a car, That wouldn't have happened. So we would have had a train ride, maybe where it was safe, outside of the border, because we're in Pakistan. We're running now out of Pakistan, like everybody else is doing. So it's something. And we had such great connections between my aunt, who became the health minister under Nehru, and other of my uncles and aunts became ministers in the first government. I think we had, and Dad worked for the British company. So I think we had a lot of pull, much more than I would have been privy to. Because we were safe,
But in the end, just you and your mother went to England.
And my mother and I then, my dad said, "You go and see your family," because Mummy had been separated for 9 years from her family during the war. She couldn't get back. And all the boats, had to go with, we had drill all day long. We had life jackets because the mines were in there. So we went from Bombay to Southampton, full clothed all day long in these, unless we were bathing, in these life jackets, because it was the only way to feel like, well, if God forbid something happens. It was an amazing journey, when we went, because it took a while to get there. It took about 4 or 5 weeks to get to England, I think. And when we got to Southampton, then we went straight to Cheshire, where Mother's family was. And then I got to meet all my cousins and have a lovely time, haystacks, ice cream. I mean, total contrast. But I remember thinking I wasn't comfortable. It was too jolly and wonderful. And I just started speaking English. I didn't even like it. So I got my poor aunt. I wasn't eating my regular diet, and so she was very frustrated and didn't know what to do. So she just said, "Can I give you some milk of magnesia?" And I said, "Yes, that's it. That's what Mummy has," because I didn't understand all the other things she was saying. So finally she said, "Oh God, thank God," she said, "this child."
Oh, I think when you're hitting your mic,
my mic's gone. She said, "I think that, you're going to have to speak a little more English."
Yeah.
because I don't understand what you're saying. And so my grandma died at the same time. It was another very tragic moment when I think about it. We get there and then grandma's dead. And grandma looks at my mother and says to her, I knew you left him, that Indian, because look at her, she's blonde and blue-eyed, or green-eyed. And my mother looked and my grandma was dead within a week. And that's the end, beginning and end of my story and when I met her. So it was a strange apparition there. And then finally, we did stay there about 8-9 months, because then we did not hear from my father at all. And I had been fascinated with Alice and the rabbit.
Yeah.
So when I saw a rabbit and a fence, I climbed it. And I thought, freedom at last, I can go and get what I want, because in India you've got servants around you and people around you. I climbed the fence, got a horrible hit on my left knee with a jagged nail, and then they couldn't get it together. They said, oh my God, it's going gangrene, it's going this and that. And I got something in the mail my mother got was an ointment, and it had come from India. So the only way we knew that he was alive is that he must have heard or read Mummy's letters somewhere. She was sending them, I think, to the office in Pakistan still. So somehow he got this ointment to me, and this leg healed slowly, whatever, I guess. Should have had antibiotics, I think,
But then
that was the moment,
after 8 months, he finally writes.
8 months he
says,
writes. In fact, we
"Come
get
back."
2 tickets in the mail, and we go from Southampton to London, well, London to Cheshire to London, London to Southampton, back to India. And that's a whole nother journey. That's fascinating, because those boats had horses on them, they had, greyhounds going for the races in Delhi and Bombay, and, trainers, and I mean, you met everybody. It was like, it's fantastic, I mean, I think you have the variety you don't realize as a child, because it's a normal child. It's your childhood, you don't think it's unusual.
Right.
So whatever I saw, and everything from risque people running around the corridors and enjoying themselves, and I thought, oh, I wonder what they're doing. And Mum said, nothing. I'm playing bridge now. I'm off to play bridge with the captain. So that was the big thing about playing bridge with the captain. So then she'd hike me off somewhere where I could do something with my hands, keeping me busy. Making leather or something, I think,
And where do you wind up settling when you go back to India?
When we actually settled in, it turns out, we thought it was Bombay, and we realized his job now takes him to Calcutta and Delhi, because we had to go to the capitals of the English capitals, which are more Calcutta, where the commerce is. So he then takes care of huge factories, and what are these derelict things left, because a lot of the corruption with the British and Indian was simultaneous. You couldn't say this was a bad guy. He could be an English guy, an Indian guy. So there was a lot of bribery and corruption, and particularly in heavy metals, because the scrap metals were a lot of money. So whenever the guy would show up, the scrap metal fellow, I'll never forget, had diamonds in all his, had diamonds all in his shirt.
Oh, right.
And we'd say, wow, that guy's really wealthy. What does he do? Oh, he just has scrap metal. No big deal. But what they'd do is they bribed the English women. So they'd bring all the vegetables, the bearer would bring the vegetables to the cook, in our case our cook, and there'd be diamonds in there. And there'd be wonderful things in there. A car might show up. So my dad, I never forget, he was running down the stairs of our house, just screaming. I never saw him. He was like a Buddhist monk. And then he would go bananas. And it's just because he couldn't understand the amount of corruption that they had created, the British. And he now then, when that happened, he had to stand in front of the unions at gunpoint and say, I'm not going to bend for this. I'm not going to do what you've been used to doing. And do what you have to do with me, but I'm not going to let this happen. So he was very strong. And I think we lived, really very well after this partition, compared to a lot of people who just didn't have anything. We were very lucky.
But did your father, was he able to take anything with him when he got out?
No, nothing. I think he had a few clothes. I had a couple of dolls I got to England, and that was it. Oh, a little doll called Joan. I had to have a doll called Joan. Mummy had Joan, so I had a Joan.
And tell me, I remember you had an uncle who stayed.
I had an uncle that was a relative of my dad's, is married to his sister. Well, the son was married to his sister, my dad's sister, youngest sister. They had palaces. My mother said, when she went in to see her in-laws, and all the relatives of my dad's, they were gold taps and palaces and all that. Well, this guy, the uncle, or the father of my uncles, decided not to go back to India. He said, I cannot afford to lose all this. He said, I'm marrying a Muslim woman. She's got 2 kids. You want to come with me, you turn Muslim. You stay with me. You don't, you're out. You're not my son anymore, or sons. So 2 sons went, and they did very well in Delhi, in the law, and then in movies, Bollywood. One of my uncles was a producer. They did very well, but they never went back. Never went back. It
Never saw
divided
their
families
father again.
all over the place. Families were very divided and very painful. We're lucky we got our lives, but But a lot of people, lost so many people.
Yeah.
Not just possessions, but people. It was more terribly horrible.
So we have a few more photos from Gay's time in high school in Calcutta. What kind of school did you go to?
Oh, I went to a Catholic school because they're the only schools that were any. There were Indian schools, but mostly the international families or people living in India who wanted an education. The schools were tied to the Cambridge exams, so that made a big prestige. It was different. And with that, when I finished, I thought, I'm never going to college. I've just done it. 10 subjects and, the Acts of the Apostles. We had to do Catholicism all day long. Hopefully, don't please take it wrong. I love all religions. Oopsie. I love all religions. But having a Catholic nun looking like a sergeant major, every day was like a little rough,
Well, we're going to see your favorite nun in a minute. But here's Gay in the corner, for those of you who can see, in the corner of this beautiful photo with her classmates.
That's two of my best friends there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were. Just unfortunately, she died, sadly, a few years ago.
And your family spent a lot of time in Delhi.
Yeah, we
too.
did Delhi and Calcutta because a lot of our families got reclamation of land and homes. So they would say, if we've got a house, it's your house.
Yeah.
So we go to Delhi and spend time with our relatives in their homes. But it was like we had our own home in a way.
Yeah.
And he was our favorite servant. He was Hindu priest. And he loved my father. And he said, I'm going to not work for your aunt anymore. I can't take what's going on in that house. So it's nice and quiet here, and I love your mother. And I'll make English food, even if I have to learn how to make English food. And he did. He got great food, liver, and he was a vegan. I mean, he was making everything. Mother wanted duck, she got a duck. I wanted a steak, I got a steak. He just would do a lot of praying. And finally, the wonderful thing about him was, because he was a priest, when Dad died, he just sat next to my bed. He would come in the morning, give me a tea, and he'd just say, I loved your father so much. I promised myself I would never love anybody. And that was my mission, to love God only. But he said, I loved your father. And sadly, it's true that I should never have loved. To love is to lose. But he was a wonderful guide for me, when I was there. I was living in America at the time. Yeah. So I went back to see Dad just before he died, and he was great. He was a lovely man. Pandit. Pandit means holy man, or priest, and that was his name. Yeah, Pandit.
And here's your mother with some of your father's family.
Yes, my dad's, this is the father, the gentleman who actually stayed and became a Muslim was the father of Uncle Pratap, and then Vimla, he was married to his dad's youngest sister. And she was a character. She was very close to the Sheila Nair, the health minister of India, the lady that you saw in the pictures. And they worked a lot together in women's colleges and trying to get more and more the medical sciences and have more women in it. So they're big proponents of getting women to be doctors at that time. Yeah.
And here's Gay and her mother. This was when you were in high school, right?
Yeah, high school. I was 14 or 15 then. So I grew my full length, which was huge. I felt like an Amazon in school. It was all, and Mommy kept saying, put high heels and lipstick. And I said, never lipstick.
But then, a year later.
Trouble. Never
high heels
never.
and lipstick.
Yeah, I want to be a little taller. Yeah. So there's there are always parks. Delhi, great parks.
Yeah. And then this is around the time you graduated from high school?
Yeah,
is that
that's
right?
it, exactly.
Yeah, with your friends.
Just graduated, and those are to my friends. I still am in communication with Rukmani, and Chandra lives in Calcutta. She's the sister of this one. Kokila sadly died many years ago, some strange thing. Yeah. And so we're all just trying to have a good time. They're busy talking about their arranged marriage, and I'm going to London.
Yeah.
I'm not staying here and waiting to do domestic science in college and just marry some guy who's going to show up in my dad's office. So that was out of the question.
And so this is actually, this is the result of Gay's decision to go to London.
Yes, so somebody said, you're so Indian. I said, well, I am Indian. I said, no, you're more Italian. I said, no, I'm Indian. So they said, can I take a picture of you all wrapped up in this thing and looking Indian? I said, sure, and I didn't even know. I just said, this is what we do with our necks. And it's like a little bit of a, funny time.
And you, what did you do in London?
In London, I just tried to get a job because Dad was very clear. He said, you're going to England and you either go to university or you're going to have to work. This is it. And I said, well, I'm going to work then. I don't want to go to university. And I didn't know what any of that meant. Of course, I just said no. And he said, well, I've got a little something for you I think you might need when you're there. And he looked at my mother and he said, just open your hand. And there were diamonds. And he said, whatever you do, you're going to make a great life. We've given you the education. We love you. We want you to set yourself on your way. And I said, great, I'm really ready for this, you know. And at the same time, he said, you're going to need money, obviously, and I can't give you. But he said, when you're short, get a job, and when you need more money, just go to Hatton Garden, sell one of these diamonds. But take your time, don't rush at it.
Yeah.
So every time Mummy came, we said, we need some extra money, what about those clothes? Mummy needs more clothes when she goes back, so the diamonds, you know.
Yeah.
But I used to work anywhere I could. I would look at the paper and just go, okay, there's a secretary there, and I didn't know what that meant, because you had to type in those days, and the last thing I wanted to do was type. So I just rummage around in somebody's file cabinet, and the next thing I knew, somebody said, you know, there's a really great job and you get more money doing that. I said, really? Great, I'll do that, you know. So whatever I had to do, and then finally I took modeling classes, which is unheard of now. And you had to wear books on your head and really walk around straight, and nobody does that anymore, I mean, obviously. And I got some modeling jobs, and then they did a little publicity. Oh, she's so Italian, she looks like that artist, or that Hollywood actress called Pier Angeli at the time. And I went, oh my God, this is amazing, what fun, you know?
Yeah.
So I just put myself out there,
Yeah.
get a few jobs, just enough to pay
Yeah.
for that. And we had a great time. London in the 60s is hard to beat.
Yeah.
It was reasonable,
I bet.
and rock and roll.
Yeah.
And now that Andy Kent lives here, you know, we
Yeah.
have a lot of discussions about London
Yeah.
and the rock and roll.
Yeah.
Well, drugs and rock and roll.
Yeah.
But I couldn't
Yeah.
do drugs, sadly, so I could eat sandwiches, I could have a good time, a glass of wine. Great fun.
Yeah.
It was good.
But you know, throughout your life, you continued going back
Oh,
to
yeah,
India.
I did go to India,
Yeah.
see my
Yeah.
father and mother.
Yeah.
They were still in Calcutta. My dad never bought a house again. We lived for 10 years in hotels
That's right.
in Calcutta, and he said, I'll never buy anything. When a man can come and take your home and your car, and he said, I will never buy anything again. It's not worth it. And it's so true, because we had the best life living in a private hotel run by Russians and Armenians in Calcutta, small, called the Continental. We had a great time there.
So,
So,
in the time that we have
Oh,
left,
yes, well, yeah, time,
we're gonna
that's right.
time.
Yeah.
So we're gonna
Gone.
spend. Oh, and this is.
The influence to my art was this
Yeah.
wonderful nun, my
So
Catholic
she
nun,
did have some good nuns.
Mother Christina.
Yeah.
Oh, it's funny, Christina's restaurant.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very frequent. She's great. She was wonderful. She
Yeah.
was so shy and sweet, and you know, they all seem so old, but I look back and I think they were pretty young, those nuns. They were
Yeah.
Loretto House, which was the education to go. And actually, I believe Mother Teresa also belonged to the Lorettos. But she was from another, of course, European. So she
Yeah.
was very encouraging. And we always had this funny thing about whatever you read, you had to draw.
Yeah.
It was like normal. Oh, you're doing Lady of Shalott. Well, just get the boat and do the lady, and you know, do a few little sketches. And so we were always like, oh gosh, I don't know which part of that poetry I want to be drawing. You know.
Yeah.
So, but at least we got the narrative,
Yeah.
and then we got the picture. You know. So later on in life, I realized what good education we had, which my mother kept saying, you had a great education. It's like, you know, and I say, really? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It was the Catholicism, I think, that did me in. Yeah.
So, you know, at a certain point in your life,
Yeah.
you return to Sister Christina and
That's
begin
right,
making work. I mean, you
So
don't
this
literally
is-
return
yeah,
to her.
no,
but
I then go actually
you start making
after
art.
London. I didn't
Yeah.
really. I worked a lot, you know, there just to get the day sort of
yeah.
just to make a living, to carry on like
Yeah.
most young people in their 20s. But it really started painting when I came to the States. I kept
Yeah.
diaries all my life, very small
Yeah.
ones, so I never thought anybody would be interested. But then I started going to the Art Institute in San Francisco. So I came
Right.
in '67, San Diego, married,
Right.
lived on ranches, San Diego, California, all of that. 2 stepchildren.
Right.
And then now I'm
Yeah.
into my 30s and I'm taking classes at the Art Institute. Very wonderful. And Perkle Jones was Ansel Adams, you know, printmaker. I'm taking from John Collier, who was the YPA, wonderful photographer, anthropologist.
Yeah.
All these classes I'm taking for people that I think are really great people. And I'm taking everything that they do,
Yeah.
whether it's stitchery or, you know, if it's metal, I took metal.
Yeah.
And I had these 2 colleges, and I then switched out to England, where I went back to England and started doing Slade, University of
Right.
Slade, at University of London. And there again, there were amazing artists and
Yeah.
painters, and so I started getting bigger on this.
Yeah.
But then I started taking a degree course, and there were requirements there
Right.
to do.
Drawing
And I've never
painting.
been good at these
Yeah.
deadlines, you know, it's horrible. So I was told to do something, and I saw F in my box in San Francisco, and oh God, I can't get an F. This is February. I went, what am I going to do with this F? So I went right to the press. I said, you know I'm not a good student. I'm really, you know, twice as old as anybody here. But give me a break. You know, what do you want from me, really? Because I don't know how to express what you want. And he said, just do some drawings for me. You know, make them 4 or 5 feet, and come back in, you know, 6 weeks or whatever it was. I said, Okay, and he gave me a little more than that, and I started doing these. And he gave me a B+. And I thought, oh, I know how to get teacher's pet now. I think I can work on this, you know. So
And
I ended up really doing these bizarre, strange charcoal drawings that were really coming out of me. I didn't know I was going through this therapy now, I realized.
Yeah.
I could have gone to a psychiatrist, but I said, no, expensive. I'll just keep painting. So this was my therapy from the beginning.
Yeah. But so in these
all
early
these
works,
arms and limbs are coming out, and
sort of suffering figures.
A lot of eyes. Well, those are like the eyes that would come to the window with the kerosene. So I didn't know they were all starting to come through.
Yeah.
And I was getting sick at that time. I was getting sick with unknown things.
Yeah.
And I understand why now. It's my therapy. Yeah.
And body parts. A lot of
it's about 6
sort
feet.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
There's
about as big as it is. Yeah.
A leg that becomes an arm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think Gail Severance showed this one. I think I kept it to myself. And twerked bodies because children, there was a lot of this being maimed and all that.
Yeah, you can see this child upside down in this piece.
I couldn't draw in straight anything, so I started drawing on round tables.
Yeah.
And I realized I didn't want a beginning and an end, and I knew the diagonal would cut things.
Yeah.
And I did my own sense of history.
Yeah.
And then met David de Villiers up here, who's a wonderful artist, shows at Gale. And he started saying, well, don't you know what design is all about? And I said, no, because I really don't care for it. I just want to do what I need to do, because it kept coming through.
Yeah.
So I was trying to learn what is design, what is color. All those things flabbergasted me when it came to art terms. I was having a good time.
But these early works were really sort of a way of processing
myself,
the experience of
and
partition.
probably the missing link was also not knowing what had happened. It was like always this thing. I asked my mother, what did happen that night? And she'd say, oh, you're being very morbid. I said, but tell me, just something. Give me a link, because I'm painting now, and there's a real need for me to get this resolved, what is happening. And she said, no, you know what, it was terrible. Yeah. And she died with that, I never could get that out of her. We were very close, really like sisters, but no, this part was not going to be revealed. Yeah. No, I understand that. Yeah. But I kept painting. But I never got that feeling. I thought if I painted, I'd get closer to that moment. But it never came, and I think I'm very lucky that it didn't come. Yeah. Frankly, I don't think anybody needs to know that, Something horrible you've seen, it can ruin your life, We know that for any of us. We have a story, It's just my story.
Yeah. And in the beginning, I mean, you've told me you had a really hard time painting whole bodies.
I couldn't paint. I went to Slade, which was a master class, and I couldn't be in the master class. And I went, why can't I be in the master class? I'd like to, because there's that 80-year-old in there, and I'm like 40 or something at the time, 39. And they said, well, you can't, because you can't do a whole body. We're not going to put you in and put all these body parts around. You're a collage artist, and you don't want to do formal training. And I said, but can't I just kind of skip that bit and just get on and become what I need to be, whatever that was? Yeah. So I had a really great teacher, and he said, okay, get yourself a 5-foot canvas, get 3, and just start going. And I said, I can't. I only do look at my little diaries. I showed him all my little diaries. He said, I think you'd be surprised. And of course, I was filling 5-foot, and they said, oh, there's the Indian Matisse now. Yeah, and the Bernard and the Matisse.
This work is a great example.
Yeah.
So here you're
that's
sort of
my first mixed gods, 5 feet. And I brought it from England back again. Yeah. I was mixed up with the Catholicism. The Goa was Catholic. So I had a Catholic priest from Goa. And then I had Ganesh always, and the hungry tiger leaping on some god in the corner there. And then, I had this blue god, who's a wonderful Hindu god. But I put about 5 or 6 religions in there. Yeah. And it was very interesting. I didn't know how it was going to come out. But placing them was the tricky part, because I hadn't got what I call academic, where's the line? And there I'd always put a diagonal line, find a straight line. And then I finally went to see one of the last paintings of Leonardo da Vinci in the National Gallery in England. And I said, I can draw that in. He left a piece unfinished. And I went, why does it have to be finished? They say, you have to finish. You have to go so the eye goes all over. And I went, but I don't want that. It's not interesting to me. So I always had to leave a little something undone. Yeah. And that's the undone part right there, another god leaning around,
and then at a certain point, you sort of move through the
process of expression. Oh, sorry, God. I thought somebody was coughing and it was me. Okay. Yeah. Oh, God.
So we just have a
Yeah.
few more minutes, but I want to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about you start looking
Yeah.
back
Right.
at your childhood in India and less focusing on the violence of partition
Yes.
and more on sort of the stories that you learned as a child. So you made this.
Yeah. I must
this
have
is
been
your
getting
first
cleared
print,
by
right?
some of this work.
Yeah.
And so I had moved here, and Jen and I have to thank Jen and Nate Galpin
Yeah.
because they are formal in their printmaking, and I could not do that as usual. And so what I loved about them is they would formalize whatever I did, and I said I'm going to do Ganesh. But I went to Victoria and Albert Museum, and I went to see the collection of Rudyard Kipling, and I was allowed to stay there for an hour with my camera while Mrs. Patel disappeared. And so I got a sense of this printmaking, and on a very big scale in India, because the Indian printmakers were led by the British. And I thought, well, I just want to do Ganesh.
Yeah.
So I started reading about him, and I stayed 2 weeks in the V&A having lunch, and I'd stay the whole day. And finally I thought, it doesn't really matter, I'm going to make my own Ganesh anyway.
Yeah.
So I had the mouse was his desk here,
Yeah.
and his little,
got a little
Ganesh
mouse.
was the secretary to a Maharaja, one of the stories. And so what he always had to do is have the mouse. I said, what is he doing with a mouse?
Yeah.
Well, my mouse is a desk, and then I decided that his tusk had to become a pen. And so, and in Calcutta, we have a lot of fish, elements of symbolism of fish. So his mouth, his little trunk was the end of a fish. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just moved between
yeah.
my Bengali printmaking, which was starting to come through because I was
Yeah.
raised in Bengal,
Yeah.
with Indian artists working in the Bengali style. And so I became a real, mishmash of one thing or another, and a little bit of lotus here and there.
Yeah.
And Nate and Jen were very, very good, and we made about 30, I think, at that time. We're making bigger, small editions,
Yeah. And then you start incorporating some of the gardens
Yes.
and the Mughal architecture.
Well, I have to blame Gail for this big one, because she kept saying, darling, we're going to have a show for you, but you can't just have all the same size. Make me a big one. I said, a big one, but this is an etching. This takes a long time to do. So then they said, well, of course we can do it. If you're going to have a show at Gail's, Christ, we'll whip this out. But I did all the drawing, all the tortuous stuff. Yes, I did. And luckily, I love that part.
Yeah.
And we did a monotype. So we only did one of everything.
Yeah.
We made
Here's
22
another one
of
from
these
that series.
in the end. Yeah.
They're just beautiful.
Yeah, so we ended up doing 22,
Yeah.
but each one was different. They
Yeah.
were monotypes by then. Yeah, they were very encouraging. But I'm very caught up with the, again, the Shalimar Garden and Punjab and these Mughal
Yeah.
architecture. Yeah, I think it comes through in the botanical, which is English,
Yeah.
and then the architecture,
Yeah.
Mughal. Yeah.
And
And the
then a lot
lotus
of
is
work about the
everywhere.
lotus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're from the third
Here's
guru of
another
Sikhism,
lotus.
direct descendants of Amar Das, and he always talked about the lotus. And my dad would say, I'm not a believer, but if you can be like the lotus, transcend the murky water, you'll be much happier, he told me.
Yeah.
As I was looking at dead mongoose in the monsoons, and I'd say, Dad, it's dead. You just went over it. That's dead. This is dead. And there was water rising. And he'd say, you're never going to make anything happen if you keep talking,
Yeah.
that everything's dead.
Yeah.
And he said, look ahead. You're looking at the back of the car.
Yeah.
You're not looking at the front. Come and sit with me and see how fabulous it is. And he said, by the way, you need to think about the lotus.
Yeah.
And I never knew that subliminally the lotus was always in my life. I was sketching it, drawing it,
Yeah.
never a rendition of it, but just
Right.
my own version of it. So.
And then it starts showing
yeah,
up.
it starts showing up
Yeah.
every collage and
And then stitchery enters
Yes.
your work. It is-
Kantha, here I'm wearing this outfit, which is all hand stitched by Indian from Calcutta, but a Japanese designer out of New York. So I sort of represent her. But what I love about it is our quilts when we slept were like this. Our nighties were never anything but cotton. But our silk bed covers were all done in quilts. And this running stitch, it's just a stitch which is a tacking stitch. So it's layers of saris that are unprinted, just straight.
Nice.
Then they block print them to make, this is a block print. And then they run the stitch all over, all through it. And so when I saw this line, I went, oh my God, these are like, this is like going to bed,
Yeah.
So I love wearing these. I just feel like they're
Yeah.
like dressing gowns. And
And you start.
I start,
started using
I start
it.
again, not traditional.
Yeah.
Actually
using
making
stitchery
work in stitchery.
your
Yeah,
work.
yeah, stitch into.
So you can see this beautiful
each one is different.
gold
It's watercolor.
line.
Yeah, it's an etching with watercolor paper that's stitched prior to being put in the press. So it's a layering situation.
Yeah.
I was near the tsunami and very close to whatever.
You were in Goa, right?
I was in Goa and I was on my way to a west part of India and I would have been dead.
Yeah.
That hotel room I saw that I was supposed to go to, I turned this way instead of there. And it was again a lady who bought three of my pieces for her children out of New York, who was a Goanese. And she
Yeah.
invited me to her house, and instead of going there, I went there.
Yeah.
and it saved my life. And so I
Yeah.
came home
This
like, Jen, I've got to do these
tsunami.
2 heads
Yeah.
on the water because I've heard stories, and it's always a story, you know, everything's a story, yeah. So that was it. And that's about faith,
sorry.
because that's the fish is out of the water, the stitch fish, and the frog is in the water, and that's an etching as well. So to me, life is like that. You know, when you least expect something, it happens.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll end
Little obsession with Alice.
We'll
Yeah.
end. We're going to end with just a couple of images from some of your most recent
Yes,
work, which is
yes.
about Alice in Wonderland,
There you go.
who's been a fascination for Gay for years.
I never understood
Yeah.
a blonde girl with blue eyes sitting in a very small room with a big window looking at a rabbit. I never got over it. In India, there's the strangest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So later I thought, well, a lot of artists have tried to be Alice. It's okay, I can be Alice. And then I started reading about Dodgson. I think his name is Dodgson. No, yeah, he's from Yorkshire, the writer, C.S. Lewis, in other words.
Yeah.
Then when I started reading about this guy, I thought, God, he's from Yorkshire, Cheshire.
Oh, Lewis Carroll.
Yeah, Lewis Carroll,
Right.
and his earlier name was
Yeah.
Dodgson. And then I thought, well, there's this girl sitting there doing nothing, alone, you know, looking provocative, and I thought, that's very weird. Anyway, I started reading more and then realized it was Lewis Carroll.
Yeah.
And I love the stories, and I like to put collage and everything, so
Mhm.
there's usually a teacup or a saucer.
Yeah.
But I have
So there's a lot of-
taken these out of my diaries too. And
Oh,
I
right.
print and put stories about my nanny,
Yeah.
so they're embedded. You
Yeah.
don't quite see them.
You
but
can
they're in
see
there.
some of the text here about her
Yes.
nanny. And then it's a combination of photo transfer.
Yes,
with-
I was modeling in England, so
Yeah.
that's some of the ones, and I cut my pictures up and reformed them, you know, Xerox them.
and,
So
and
they look like
drawing.
henna in a way, yeah.
Yeah, they're really wonderful.
Yeah, it's an old boat, and I was 16
Yeah.
now.
And here's your rabbit.
Yeah, there's my rabbit. We kind of faked that one, we just put it in. We liked him, so we popped him in, yeah.
And then this one has some of the photos you've already seen,
Yes,
Gay with the
gay
car.
and the sketching into
Yeah.
there, and yeah. I wore saris when I was a kid,
Yeah.
playing with the servants, you know, children.
Yeah.
Had a great time. So
Yeah.
the monotype, now I'm only doing one of a kind monotypes, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's it, yeah.
So maybe we'll leave off with
I
this
think
image.
so,
But I
yeah,
would love
yeah,
to ask
yeah,
you, you know, what your thoughts are on,
Mhm.
particularly given the conflict, ongoing conflict between India and
Oh,
Pakistan around
currently,
Kashmir.
yeah, currently,
What
yeah.
are your? Do you have any final thoughts about
I just
partition?
think
or-
that people really can get on, and the way I saw Muslims and Sikhs and Indians where I was raised, everybody seemed to be getting on just fine.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, it's a religious war. Well, it wasn't a religious war. It was a land, basically, that suited the British and a lot of other people to basically divide. You know, it's about divide and conquer.
Mhm.
And the main thing is they wanted to get the oil from the Middle East. And so when Churchill and Roosevelt got together, I'd read a story saying, Roosevelt said, I'm going to get to India. I think I've got a lot of stuff to do there. And he said, really? He said, let me tell you, Churchill said, you're going to have a lot of blood on your hands
Mm.
because we are getting out and it's not going to be good. But Mountbatten kept saying, no problem, I'm a civil civilian. I'm not an army man, which he was. But he said, I think we'll leave it in a very calm, peaceful way.
Mhm.
And we'll be able to fix it. I mean, I love that naivety.
Yeah.
And so really they had no reason to stay. They were already, coffers were run dry from the World War II. And what they really decided is there's more to Pakistan having this part of the land, because we can get to the oil to the Middle East. If you argue with the Indians all day long, they'll never say yes. The Muslim leader will. The trouble is the Muslim leader died of
Yeah.
cancer very quickly.
Just a year after. Yeah.
So the whole story of everybody got changed for this simple things of the map maker. Very complex things happen,
Yeah.
but in a very quick time.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of destruction for so many wonderful people.
Yeah.
And it goes on till today. Today, the good thing about the new Prime Minister I hear, he's allowed the Sikhs to come and look at the shrines,
Mm.
which are their shrines. So things are getting better. I think the Muslim government want things to be better now. But the Indians are still ready to go and jump. You know, if they can get going, they will. They're still muscling, you know, and that has to be fought in, like the new, there's a new voting, there's a new, what do you call it, election coming up.
yeah.
So that'll all be sorted out, because there's now more hate in some areas for the Muslims in India. The rising population, because there's no limit to how many children they can have, whereas Hindus can't, and they don't pay into the system. They pay to their temples and say, gosh, we have no money, we've got to pay the mosque. So they're not paying taxes, so there's a lot of resentment among Indians about Muslims in certain areas. And they're being, 1,000 people will be killed on any one time. This happened just recently.
Wow.
They said, oh no, we don't know how that happened. Well, they sent thugs in and killed them. Yeah, so it's still very raw, you know.
Yeah.
Feelings are very
70
raw.
years later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But those families that are Muslim and Hindu have got together when they need to, you know, like families we know.
Yeah. Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Thanks for the Sun Valley Center and the library. And thank you, all my friends.
And if anybody has any questions, I know it's
No,
already 7:15,
Yeah,
but if
it's
you have any
7, yeah.
questions, I hope you'll ask them of Gay.
So, Gay, your mother,
Yeah.
the day she died, was
Yes.
a very proper, prim
I know,
English-
you know that.
English woman.
Yes.
So how is it that you so strongly identify with the Indian side instead of the
I
English
think
side?
as the whole house was run by Indians, you know, we could say that side. And the only English person I was really familiar with was my mother. Though she took me to the club, there was a club called the Gymkhana Club. And I just didn't like the mentality. I didn't like what they said about Indians. They called my dad a native. And I just took a bias, you know. And it's not like I hated English. I think I didn't know what would come later, which is that I love England. I would love, you know, being half English. But I think at that moment, I was more indoctrinated, you could say, with the environment as well, to being Indian. I liked the identity of being Indian, you know. It suited me. I had grandma. I didn't have mother's side so much as I had the Indian side. So, yeah, I love that.
Did your mom speak Punjabi? or
Mommy
Urdu?
totally said, don't speak to me a word of Hindi, English, only Hindi. And she really was very very good about that. She just said, I don't want to know I'm English, but I'm in love with India, and I'm in love with your father, and I love the culture. It's far richer than we have. So that was it. She was done. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
In a lot of those photos younger, I noticed you're more the European dress, where your
Yes.
schoolmates are in Indian garb.
Yes,
So
yes.
did that set you apart, or did you choose that, or did Joan make you?
No, nobody said anything. One day I just appeared, you know, to look taller and more like my mother. My dad said, oh my God, finally. It was almost like, oh, she's going to be beautiful. It's going to be all right. We can do this. And I went, yes, but I would still wear my Indian outfits with my girlfriends. We went to a party with those girls, you know, they'd say, come on, you know, let's drag you in, and they wrap everything around me, yeah. So I went both ways in that sense. I was wearing two different cultures, you know, clothes. But I ultimately, I think, as I was in London and I was thinking more of the British, that I was going to go there, that it seemed to me more natural to wear these clothes. You know, I was international school and all that, so we always wear skirts. In school, we had a uniform, you know. Yeah, it was more comfortable.
I think Deb had a question.
Hi there.
I just wanted to ask what was the attitude like to when you guys went back to India
Yes,
after,
yes, right, yeah.
after
I know,
partition, and
yeah.
what, you know, you being pretty white and your mom being white, what was the Indian attitude towards you? Did you feel uncomfortable? Were people
No,
negative?
no, you know, it was amazing. I think as my father, because it went both ways, you know, when the British were leaving, they were getting hold of people in the parks, like in Shalimar Garden. My mother said that an English woman had been hit, because they'd say, go, British, go, when are you going to go? And the whole century, like, when are you really going to go? And immediately my father came in and said, she's my wife, please respect us. And they just went, you know, back. I saw that. I saw it on the other side, where they say, sorry, we didn't know that you had an Indian husband. That was in London, and there was biases everywhere. I mean, you know, but never to the extent that I've heard of bias. I think we were very lucky. Dad was also more Italian looking, with the big, you know, green eyes, and I think it was just that we were also in a circle maybe with family that were more international. So for us it was like, okay, that's the Bawas, it's okay. You know, a little bit. And you know that.
But with your servants, having Muslim servants,
Yeah.
did you ever not feel secure during that partition time? They were
Never. They saved us. They literally saved. They could have killed us any night of that year, and they didn't. And they could have killed us because they were going to be, you know, basically looked at by their own people. Like, what are you doing in there? And they said, we make a livelihood. They had homes in our compound. So Dad said, all of you guys, as long as I'm here, I can do this for you. I can take care of you. Once I leave, I can't do anything. And so it was like just keeping us alive was like that, you know, was important to them.
And was that symbolic of the other Muslim servants as well? Do you think
I
there
don't
was
know,
the
because
same
his friend, no. I
relationship?
think some friends got killed, yeah, in their houses, because they had Muslim servants, you know. I think that was the problem, that a lot of the lower caste, or what they call the servants for the Indians, even lower caste Indians, had Muslim servants.
Yeah.
So there was this like, oh, he's Muslim, because there was no caste for the Muslim. They were just our servants, or they were denigrated, you know. But we never felt that way, because the cook was a cook. He was making our food. But I have to tell you something funny. The cook was doing his Quran reading while he was cutting the chicken. Never go anywhere near anybody cutting a chicken, because it took him like an hour and a half while the chicken was running around with no head. That was Friday. We knew it was Chicken Friday. Anyway, there was no, I think the servants were amazing. They were amazing. I had to tell that story. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't like chicken for a long time, except it was curried. It was okay. Anyway.
Oh, there's a question back there.
So on a more serious side,
Oh God, no. Yeah.
were the people in eastern Pakistan going through the same thing as you were on the western side?
And then and also later, because the divide came where you have two Pakistans. It's like they thought, oh, no problem, we'll make a Pakistan over there. All the Muslims will get together. They have nothing in common, It's so different in Bangladesh now.
Yeah.
Later, it became Bangladesh. It's so different from the Muslims in Pakistan on the east side, west side. They're two different people. They have a different dialogue because they've raised differently. So no, there is no kind of. I mean, some families probably are in both places, but there's no real oh gosh, I'm coming to my homeland. I'm coming to Bang from west side to east. There wasn't that, no, because India's in the middle, in a big way. Yeah,
I just have one other.
yeah, sure.
I just keep asking myself, what was the purpose of the killing?
Oh, you know what? When you lose your livelihood, and you lose your home, and somebody promises you something they can't deliver,
Yeah.
and we're talking 17 million people at one time, in a very short time, and you're running, and you don't know what you're running to. There's nothing to go to. The Muslims were wonderful craftspeople. They lost all of that economy because they had to leave the cities to go to now an unknown, region where there was no infrastructure. So that was the worst thing. There was no infrastructure in Pakistan. Nobody made a plan. So people were killing each other just to get work. They say, you've taken my job. I'm going to kill you now. I can't do anything. I'm going to kill you now. So there was this hate that came on, and they called it religious war. But it really wasn't. It was just this horrible thing that happened that people created in a false economy, That was really sad. And so everybody hated everybody, but before that they didn't. Not that I'm aware of, yeah. They might have had religious differences and said, oh God, that Hindi. I remember my dad saying, oh, I'll tell you a Sikh joke. He said, we would laugh and say, what an idiot that man is. We'd have our local jokes, and we'd always say something stupid about an Indian against the Muslim, but they were like colloquial. We were like enjoying jokes between each other. They'd say the same thing about Indians, but not this kind of hate. We'd never seen anything like this before. That's what's terrifying, The volume of it is horrible. Yeah. Thanks, Jay.
All right. Oh, Ruth, did you?
Awesome.
One question, where did Srinagar fit into all of this?
Ah, well, that's a story. I didn't put it in, but you see, Nehru was born in Kashmir.
Oh,
So that was the problem. He did not want it to go Muslim because he was born there. So he wanted a history that Nehru was born, and it should remain, in his name. So what he did, he got a Maharaja from somewhere in South India and popped him in there. And the legislative and the voting went as pro-Pakistan, but they decided not to have a plebiscite vote. They just said, we don't need to do anything. We are taking it, and that's what it is. The only area where he really mucked up, beyond all the other mess, I think, was making that decision at that time. That, basically, let's just not worry about Kashmir. It's going Indian. But the trouble is, a little bit of Kashmir, it's like Ireland and England, went basically to the Muslims. And that's the constant fight, again, because nobody quite knows who they are. They want to join their people because they are the same people. But they can't be because you have this division within Kashmir. You have the east and the west side, and they're two different. One ruled by Indians and one ruled by the Muslims. So it's this constant, blow up a temple here, throw something there. Maybe a lot of people live very peacefully, but then there are some you hear horrible stories. And I think, Ben, you just came back from Kashmir, he told me, or a while ago. So, and you enjoyed it, right? It was okay? You felt okay?
I thought it was great.
I think because he looks a little Muslim, that's why. Or Sikh. If you had a hat on, you'd be Sikh. He's safe. He's okay.
Gurneet, did you have a question?
Well, I was just to say, you mentioned that, I think I heard you mention you were a direct descendant of Guru Amar Das.
Yeah, some of us, yeah.
Interesting. So
You too, you're Sikh. You're
Yep.
Sikh and Hindu. No, you're Sikh altogether.
Yep, Sikh,
Yeah,
yep,
there you are,
yep.
yeah.
And just was wondering,
Yeah.
did you have a Guru Granth Sahib in your house? Was Sikhism? Did
My
that
father,
follow?
yeah, my father was so atheist. He said religion and politics, and of course that's all we had in our family. He said, do not listen to anybody. And that was 3/4 of our family. He didn't care to listen to. But he was really agnostic. He just said, all I've seen is so much suffering, and I've seen it in the name of religion and politics. And he said, nobody seems to make a clear-cut decision on what is common sense, And I think he was I think he died young because he really was destroyed by what he saw was really not the India he had hoped for. He just saw a lot of corruption, a lot of things. So he was very jaded in that way. And I'm sorry about that because he was a great guy. He's a very Renaissance man. But I think, yeah, we had my grandma, who was Hindu, always doing, and then grandfather was doing the Granth Sahib. He had the whole book out and the whole thing. So it's funny for us, we'd have the Hindu, then we had the cook was Muslim with the whole Quran, cutting the chicken. I mean, it was just like, wow, it's the same world, So I never thought of it being different, and we didn't think of it that way. You were raised, I think, in Darji,
In
in Punjab.
Our parents, we were
Yeah.
from America, but
Yeah.
also I think what surprised me of my
Uh-huh.
time in India
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that religion prevails in so many people's lives
Mhm.
and it guides them, but it's not necessarily associated with one, at least with the Sikh philosophy,
Yeah.
with one God.
Yes,
So
that's
you
right.
know, a Sikh will
Monotheist,
bow to a
yeah,
Hindu
monotheist,
temple.
yeah.
Hindus will do,
Exactly,
and you
what they don't
celebrate every
Yeah.
festival.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
the
mhm,
segregation
mhm.
between the religions and things like that is not as, it makes it seem like partition was all about segregation.
No, it wasn't. You see, it was about that greed of getting to the oil. If you gave Pakistan the port, then you could get there. It was all about the greed because they were running out of money.
Yeah.
And India was not producing for them anymore. It became the cow that was just sitting, grazing. And that was going to kill so many economies, all in Europe and particularly England. They
So much
suffered.
hides behind the
Yeah,
facade of
yeah,
religion. and I
yeah.
think that's-
I'll never get over Churchill just saying, get them out of there and just get the Pakistanis in there and we'll make a deal. I mean, God, I thought he was a great guy until I read that line somewhere. And I went, oh, I'm so unhappy about him now. really, really upset. It's sad. It's sad when it happens all the time. People make decisions on greed. It's what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.